You are looking at an aerial shot of the procession for Ridge Meadows RCMP Constable Rick O'Brien. The 7-year veteran of the force was gunned down executing a search warrant this morning, and despite the best efforts of paramedics, he died at the scene. The procession left the scene of the shooting in Coquitlam about half an hour ago and will ultimately make its way out to Abbotsford, joined by many other officers and first responders along the way. The procession will make one stop along the way in Maple Ridge at the Ridge Meadows RCMP detachment, which is where Constable O'Brien served, carrying on to Abbotsford from there. But this will be a major disruption for folks out on the roadways this evening. Good evening and thanks very much for joining us. Law enforcement agencies are in mourning once again, planning for another funeral. We have team coverage for you in Coquitlam, where the shooting happened, out to Maple Ridge, where the fallen officer's detachment is, and in Surrey, where RCMP provided a late afternoon update with a few more details. The shots first rang out inside a condo building. And so let's start with Travis Prasad, who was outside that condo tower where the officers came under fire. Travis, walk us through what we know about what happened.
Yeah, Chris, I'm at Pinetree Way and Glen Drive right now. Directly behind me, you can't see the tower, but there is a condo tower, and that is where members of Ridge Meadows RCMP were executing a search warrant this morning in one of the units in that condo tower. Now, while they were doing that, there was some sort of altercation with a man that left one police officer dead. As you said, we now know that officer is Constable Rick O'Brien. The roads have reopened here, but as you can imagine, earlier today, it was a very intense scene. Armed RCMP officers moving quickly, a sign of something serious.
I was driving past and we saw this police officer with a rifle. I was like, whoa, what's going on?
One witness describes hearing what sounded like a car engine backfiring near Pinetree Way and Glen Drive, but quickly realized it was more than that.
Just a shot and then a bunch of people in the building, and we came out and seen a bunch of cars.
The police response was quick and substantial, from Mounties to the emergency response team.
Riot shields and battering rams and rifles and all that stuff.
The cop cars kept coming. Eventually SWAT came. I think now there's like 7 SWAT cars. There's 2 police dogs upstairs.
Several blocks of the busy Pinetree Way were shut down to vehicles. Police quickly securing the area, witnesses watching it all unfold.
We noticed an officer limping. He was bleeding from a wound in his leg. He had a tourniquet on.
There's so much blood.
Someone was taken away in ambulance and they were doing chest compressions.
They're doing CPR.
The RCMP say Constable Rick O'Brien was shot and killed at the scene. 2 more officers were taken to hospital. 1 has already been released, while the other is expected to recover. The suspect, who was also shot, was taken into custody and transported to hospital with non-life-threatening injuries.
Lots of homes, lots of businesses in this area. Now, while all of this was unfolding in the morning, everyone was told to stay inside, shelter in place while the police response was happening. I spoke to one woman who works at a business right underneath the condo tower, and she tells me it's not surprising to see police cars here. They're regularly called to the building, but never anything of this magnitude. And now with Constable Rick O'Brien killed here in the line of duty, this is a community, Chris, that is just in disbelief right now.
Like a lot of us. Travis Prasad in Coquitlam, thanks very much for that. Now, we have seen a lot of emotion at that scene and also at the Ridge Meadows RCMP detachment in Maple Ridge, the home detachment of Constable O'Brien. And that's where Troy Charles is for us tonight. Troy?
Chris, obviously and understandably a very emotional atmosphere around the Ridge Meadows area and here at the RCMP detachment. Earlier today, lots of hugs and tears being passed from officers and staff. And around 2:30 p.m., the flags were lowered to half-mast. As right now, we see behind the procession is passing through.
So just as we threw down to Troy, the procession passed right behind him. We saw the ambulance go by Troy, that ambulance carrying the body of Constable Rick O'Brien, and lots of other officers lining the procession route.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. We have probably about 15 cars here from the Ridge Meadows detachment. They will soon be pulling out and following the procession behind, and that is going to Abbotsford General Hospital there in Abbotsford. As you mentioned, Constable Rick O'Brien, 51 years old, has a wife and children, originally from Ottawa, been with the Ridge Meadows detachment since 2016. All 7 of his years served with the Ridge Meadows detachment. Sadly, he was just 1 week away from his 7-year anniversary. He'd always served, like I said, active member of the community policing on the front lines. Also, there's a memorial already that is set up out the front door here. Lots of people coming by with flowers, candles. And earlier today, we caught up with ex-RCMP Staff Sergeant Major John Buis, who during his career was shot in the line of duty. Here's what he had to say.
This is the first, 24 hours where it's hitting people very hard, and it's difficult to get motivated and get moving again when you hear this kind of thing. But I know that their co-workers will do a good job and will continue to work and serve. But it's just one of those gut-wrenching incidents throughout your service that do occur that give you a moment to stop and pause.
Chris, as you see, just vehicle after vehicle still as the procession moves through here on Dooney Trunk Road, through Maple Ridge, on its way to Abbotsford. Cars honestly down the road as far as you can see, and just a tremendously tragic day here in Maple Ridge. And now, as we might just pull off to the side here, as the group from the Ridge Meadows department, they are going to be pulling out into the road, and they're going to join the procession. Chris, I'll send it back to you.
Be repeated throughout the trip out to Abbotsford for sure. Troy Charles in Maple Ridge at the Ridge Meadows detachment, which is where Rick O'Brien served. Thanks very much for that coverage. Now, we'll hold on this shot as some of the Ridge Meadows officers who worked with Constable O'Brien join the procession. And they're, if we remember back to Shaylin Yang, the Burnaby RCMP officer who was killed last October, the procession for her stretched blocks and blocks, and the same thing is going to happen again here for Constable Rick O'Brien. All right, there is a lot that police can't say about the shooting that happened in Coquitlam, but we did get an update on this tragic situation just a short time ago, and we'll check in with Janet Brown now, who is in Surrey, where that media conference took place. Janet?
Chris, good evening. It was a very emotional and somber news conference. We heard from the commanding officer of the BC RCMP, Dwayne McDonald, as well as the officer in charge of the Ridge Meadows RCMP. First of all, we learned more about 51-year-old Constable Rick O'Brien. He had a wife and children. He loved visiting schools, apparently, had a great sense of humor, always participating in food drives, and was also a decorated RCMP member. As for the officer in charge of the BC RCMP, Dwayne McDonald, he did not mince any words describing how he feels after today's tragic events.
Standing here and speaking about the impact of the on-duty death of Constable Rick O'Brien is the most difficult moment I've had in my career in the RCMP. I cannot speak to the details of what unfolded today, but I can share that the loss of Rick will be felt deeply by his family, his colleagues, and to the community of Maple Ridge and Pitt Meadows and Coquitlam and across the country.
Oh, I'm outraged. I don't know what it's going to take. I'll leave it at that, but to see police officers across this country killed trying to protect their communities enrages me.
And Chris, we were also reminded by Dwayne McDonald that we are now coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the Burnaby RCMP member who was murdered in a city park. Back to you.
Yeah, amazing. We've had 2 in the last calendar year, Janet, and many more beyond that, and we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. Now, Richard Zussman has been covering the meeting of the Union of BC Municipalities all week. Obviously, they got the news today too, Richard, and there was a number of people willing to speak out and react to what they learned about Constable O'Brien today.
Yeah, when shots were being fired here in Coquitlam, Chris, Coquitlam Mayor Richard Stewart was on the floor at UBCM, and as he was getting news of what was happening in his community, you could see the emotion on his face. He then went behind the stage where Premier David Eby had just finished his speech and received a briefing from Public Safety Minister Mike Farnworth. Farnworth and Eby in tears sharing the information with the mayor around what had happened in this community. Clearly, this has had an impact not just in Coquitlam and Maple Ridge and Pitt Meadows, but across British Columbia. Here's a very emotional Public Safety Minister, Mike Farnworth.
Every day in our province, men and women put on a uniform to go out and to keep our communities and our people safe. Sometimes they don't return home. Today is one of those days.
This is a horrible day. It's tragic, incredibly tragic. And our community, our hearts go out to the family, to the friends, the co-workers, the colleagues of an officer that went to work this morning hoping to help for the whole day and whose life and career were cut short.
It's not an easy thing for a community when you have someone who they're just a regular person who, goes to work and comes home to their loved ones and family members the same as any other person. And I guess that's what is very impactful for me personally, knowing that, what a tight-knit family the policing world can be.
And we're hearing from federal politicians as well. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau sending out this tweet. Every day, police officers put their lives on the line. Today, an officer in Coquitlam lost their life. I'm sending my condolences to their family, friends, and the RCMP. And to the officers who were injured, I'm wishing you a fast and full recovery. Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative leader, my thoughts are with the family and friends of the RCMP officer killed and the officers wounded in a horrific shooting at Coquitlam. Such tragedies are becoming too familiar across Canada. We must do more to bring home safe streets for Canadians and those who protect us every day. There's also a personal tie-in for Public Safety Minister Mike Farnworth. A few months after he became Public Safety Minister, one of the first awards he gave was to Constable Rick O'Brien, part of a team who received an award for putting themselves in substantial risk to enter residence of an armed home invasion in progress to rescue the hostages and apprehend the suspects. Clearly, politicians and British Columbians celebrating a man who is a great hero, Chris.
Yeah, no doubt. And there are many others like him. Richard, thank you very much for that. As we know, this is not the first time that tragedy has struck BC's policing community. The most recent cases of police officers killed in the line of duty: Constable Shaylin Yang with Burnaby RCMP. We mentioned her. She was killed in October last year. Constable Ian Jordan with Victoria Police in 2018. Constable John Davidson with Abbotsford Police, also shot and killed while responding to a call in 2017. And then there's Constable Sarah Beckett with West Shore RCMP, who was killed by a drunk driver in 2016. And there are many more beyond that. We thank them all.